Okay, so today we're going to take a quick look at the Persian Wars. This is a period of time when we get to 500 BCE and moving down into 400 BCE, where the Greeks were becoming very strong states. They had developed very modern states in their era of time. They were all trading empires in their own right, these individual city states. Some of them were more powerful than others, and we've mentioned Athens and Sparta because those two were kind of the biggest power bases in their regions, and other Greek city states, while powerful, usually sought to be allied with either Athens or Sparta. And that's going to be part of the Second War. But anyway, when we get to this, we're going to be talking in this slide about the Persian Wars, or this PowerPoint about the Persian Wars. Whereas next week, we're going to spend a lot of time on something called the Peloponnesian Wars. Because the Peloponnesian Wars is its own very interesting period of time in which we have a Cold War that sometimes spins off into a hot war and then back down into a Cold War again. And this is between two superpowers that emerge after the Persian invasions into Greece. And that is called, again, the Peloponnesian War. I can't wait to talk about that one. But for now, we're going to be looking at what makes these two city states, Athens and Sparta, incredibly powerful. And that will lead us into next week. So the Persians invade for a very specific reason. They were an empire that was growing larger, and we'll talk more about the Persians next. After we're done with this early part of the Greek empires, we're going to be talking about the Persians. When we look at the Persians, then, and you may not have heard of these names yet, but you will in due time, we're going to look at a guy named Darius, who is an emperor of what will be Persia over here. And since we haven't talked about it yet, basically all that used to be Mesopotamia is now run by the Persians, this empire that's grown and taken over. So we'll talk very soon about a guy named Cyrus, and then we'll talk about Darius, and then we'll talk about Xerxes. It's all these different characters that play a role over in the region that we were first studying when this class started. But since we're over here, we're going to kind of talk about what's going on with these guys. So Athens is right here, and then you have this thing called the Peloponnesus. That's this whole region right here, and then you've got Sparta. And Athens and Sparta are these, again, these two powers that are playing their roles in leading the different city states of Greece in various ways. Well, it's 1519 BC. And the Persians are going to be expanding over to this coastline from here in Asia Minor over to this coastline, getting ever closer to Greece. And so the Persians are getting very close to the Aegean Sea. Now, there's this a group of people that live here. They're Greeks as well. They're just a little bit different. They're maybe even a little more Macedonian and even Dorian than they are Greek specifically. This is a different group of Greeks than, say, live over here. And these are called Ionian Greeks when we get to this region, the Ionian Greeks. So the Persians are invading and taking over part of the Ionian Greek territory. And what the Ionian Greeks are doing is they're calling for help. And here's this little name right here, Ionia, right? The Ionian Greeks. Well, it's 499, and the Ionian Greeks, who are being subjugated by the Persians under Cyrus and then later Darius, these two kings that we'll talk about, they're going to ask for help. So the Ionians actually say, we need your help. And they send messengers over to Athens and Sparta and the other city states as well. Ultimately, what's going to happen is Athens is going to get involved. Athens is going to see that this is an opportunity for them to expand their power base a bit. And since Athens, out of all the Greeks of the time, have the largest, most advanced naval power, the Athenians will get involved. And so the Athenians are going to send ships from Athens over to Ionia here, and they're going to land troops, and the Athenians will fight against the Persians a little bit, and then the Persians will come back. And basically kick the Athenians back out and re-subjugate the Ionians and punish the Ionians actually for what they did by calling in the Athenians. Well, this process where Athens decided to get involved is going to anger the emperor of Persia. So that guy named Darius at the time is now very angry, and Darius is going to use this as an excuse to raise taxes in Persia and gather together the warlords who manage all the different satrapies or the different counties and states of Persia and bring together this massive army so that he can go forth and invade Greece. He didn't really have an excuse yet to invade Greece. It's very expensive to go from here all the way over to here because you're not just invading Greece, you're also invading Greater Macedonia. And so Persians, it's a long way to get from here to here and then conquer all your way down and then fight into Greece itself. So the deal is that this is his excuse. Darius is going to invade Greece because the Athenians ticked him off. They dared to challenge the power of the Persian Empire by trying to help the Ionians. Okay, so let's get down to what happens. I've only got a couple slides on this because this is pretty quick. The major story is what happens as a result, as opposed to how this actually went down itself, but it gives you an idea of how these guys fight, so might as well get into it. The Persian Empire, as opposed to, because I was talking about having to send big armies around here, that's going to take too much time, Darius finally realizes, as opposed to actually sending an army through Macedonia and then fighting everybody on the way down into Greece proper, what he's going to do, Darius, is he's going to get a bunch of warships, a few hundred of them, and he's going to load his troops onto the warships, and then he's going to sail from Ionia all the way over to Athens, in this region of the Peloponnese right here to land troops and attack. And he really wants to attack Athens because if Persia can take out Athens, then there really will be no major naval power in this region, which means that the Persians can expand at their leisure and take over ever more territory for their empire. So a few notes then. The Persian army is going to land at a place called Marathon. This is the shoreline called Marathon right here, and it's 490 BC. Okay, the Greeks are going to do this thing. The Athenians and a few others are going to put a fight up at Marathon, and then they're going to flee because honestly, there were way too many Persians, and so the Athenians and their allies are going to basically run away. And what that means is there's nothing really left here. The town of Marathon has been captured and there's just mountains here. So what happens is Darius thinks, well, gosh, I've got an easy mark here. The Athenians just ran away. I'm going to board all my guys, my thousands of soldiers onto our ships. By the way, this is going to take a couple weeks. This is not something you just do real fast. So over the course of a couple weeks, Darius is slowly but surely loading his men all back onto their ships so that he can sail around this peninsula here and then go and attack Athens directly. Remember, Athens is a really big walled city at this point on top of a hill. It's quite powerful. So it's not going to be that easy to attack, but Darius has just now watched the Athenians fight against him and be overwhelmed and then run away, which, as it turns out, is a ruse. It was a trick the Athenians had played because the Athenians have already staged their navy, okay, to get ready to attack the Persians when the Persians were not really paying attention. So what happens is while the Persians are boarding their ships, again, it's going to take weeks to do this, while they're not paying attention. The Persians don't think they're going to be attacked by anybody. They're boarding their ships. What's going to happen is the Athenians are going to send in their navy, which is actually hiding up here. So the Athenians send in their navy and attack a bunch of unprotected and unprepared ships. And that is going to result in the Persians going into a chaotic panic. They're going to lose about half of their ships in this process, and a bunch of soldiers, because of course a coalition army is going to come back and attack whoever's left along the shoreline here, whoever the Persians could not pick up in their ships, and the Athenians and some of the other Greek allies win. They win because the Persians have to retreat. Well, this looks really bad back in the Persian Empire for Darius, so he's going to try to find a way to come back one day and pay the Greeks back for this insult. Okay? So that's going to lead us to Persian War number 2 a little bit later. I want to mention that again, where the Persians originally landed was a place called Marathon, and there was this Greek fellow there who is going to run the news that the Athenian navy defeated the Persian army and navy, and he's going to run 26.2 miles back to Athens to report, "Rejoice, we conquer." And then reportedly he dies from exhaustion after that run. And since that time, that has been considered the marathon. It's basically the distance of a specific kind of marathon. So there you go, a little tradition as to where that comes from in Western culture. Okay, what happens then at the during the Second Persian War at a place called Thermopylae? It's kind of a fun story. So in 780 BC, Darius' son Xerxes decides he's going to be the one to conquer Greece. And he's going to start by trying to conquer the Athenians, obviously, and then he wants to conquer the rest of Greece. Well, here's how that goes down. 200,000 soldiers, according to Persian records, and about 1,000 ships are going to take off. And unlike what Darius did, Xerxes is actually, I'm going to go back to this map since it's so easy. Xerxes is going to send troops this way, and he's going to send troops back across the Aegean Sea as well. By ships, right? So he's sending a much larger force than his dad Darius ever did. Okay, so 23 Greek city-states will actually join together. These are not city-states that like each other. They are fiercely independent. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But they join together to fight against the Persians because they know the Persians could easily take down one city at a time. So you're going to have to gather together to fight these guys. There is a Hellenic League that is created. The Spartans are going to be the leaders of the land army, and we call that the Hellenic League. So the Hellenic League, led by Sparta, is in charge of the soldiers, whereas the navy, which is going to be based on the Athenian navy and a few other city-states that have some ships to land, will be run by the Athenians. Okay, so army and navy run by two different city-states. So the Persians invade Greece. To sum it up, the Persian army has little trouble as it moves through northern Greece, going into Macedonia. Then there's this little mountain pass that the Persian army finally gets to called Thermopylae. And there are going to be 7,000 Greeks waiting for the Persians at that mountain pass. It's a very narrow pass, and this is a place where not that many soldiers can hold off even the entire Persian army because the Persians could only put a few dozen soldiers into this pass at one time. So 7,000 Greeks waiting for a massive 200,000 man Persian army, just planning on basically holding off the Persians until they couldn't pay for this war any further, and their soldiers would have to go home at some point. That was the idea. The gamble here is that if you can just hold off the Persians at this one pass, the Persians just would not be able to afford to stay there trying to get through. That was the idea. So the Persian army is basically blocked from moving forward, and at that point, somebody show the Persians a sneaky way to get behind the Greek army that is blocking the pass, and this is where we get to our 300 Spartan story. Okay, so let me give you maps. The Gulf of Malea right here, this is where the Persian army has gotten to, and I'm going to go back to that big map again. And the big story here is that the Athenian navy has been kind of blocked in a bit because the Persian navy is sailing out here and roaming about. So what happens is we have this incident in the Second Persian War where Xerxes' army has come all the way this way. They've made it around the coast all the way down here, and now they're going to be getting to Thermopylae, all right, which is right down in here. Okay, so the Persian army is coming down this way, coming down this way. They finally get down to here, and these are basically mountains, this darker color here. So the Persian army gets right to here, and they're blocked by 7,000 Greeks right there. Well, what happens is a large contingent of the Persian army sneaks around after a few days on this goat path. Okay, this little trail comes right down here and starts to attack the Greek army from behind, which means the Greeks have to flee. They cannot stay here because they will now die if they are basically surrounded and slowly pummeled to death by the Persians. So the Greeks have to leave. So they start to escape because there's only the smaller Persian army that's gotten around to the back. So the Greeks kind of push through and they start to escape.
The Spartans, a group practically worshipped by popular culture and military institutions for producing the ultimate warrior. Badass super soldiers trained from childhood with unmatched strength, discipline, and courage, battling against tyranny and oppression. Yet this narrative is a lie, a vast, millennia-long distortion of the truth built up by propaganda, biased sources, and politicization. Today, we will unmask the truth behind the Spartan myth.
This is Sparta!
Let us first begin by confronting the elephant in the room, the story that everyone knows, the last stand of bold Leonidas and his 300 against an army of 1,000,000 Persians. This is the heart of the Spartan legend, a scene immortalized in painting, poem, song, book, comic, and film, each retelling, further embellishing an alternate history. However, the very foundations of the myth are challenged when we learn that the battle was never intended as a suicide mission, that there were 20 times more allied Greeks than Spartiates at the start of the fight, and almost 4 times as many allied Greeks there at the end, that the last stand was an anomaly. It is only recently that scholars have been able to turn a critical eye on much of what we think we know about the Spartans. Thermopylae. By the time of the 5th century BCE, the Spartans had solidified their position as one of the primary leaders of Hellas. This presented them with a unique opportunity to achieve greatness with the outbreak of the Greco-Persian Wars. While the Spartans played a minor role in the First War, they would take supreme command of the anti-Persian forces in the larger invasion 10 years later. But as Greece was overrun, the coalition worried that the Spartans would elect to sacrifice the northern cities and instead defend their home base to the south. As a show of commitment, the Spartans decided to make a stand at Thermopylae. Contrary to popular belief, this was not a heroic suicide mission by Leonidas and the brave 300. Rather, it was the deployment of a small, mixed group of 7,000 hoplites to hold the pass while the rest of the levies were raised for an anticipated showdown with the main Persian army. However, Xerxes arrived sooner than the Greeks expected, sending the allied commanders into a panic. Herodotus tells us that many wished to retreat, but that it was the Phocians and Locrians, not the Spartans, who insisted on holding the line. Ultimately, Leonidas elected to stay, but sent requests for immediate reinforcements. There is no evidence he intended to fight to the death for glory's sake. Over the next 2 days, the Greek army took turns holding the pass at Thermopylae, while the navy defended the Straits of Artemisium. The encounter at sea was beginning to favor the Persians, and the land force was similarly threatened when an encircling goat path was revealed to the invaders. It is at this point that the majority of the Greek force abandoned the position. A small contingent composed of the surviving 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans remained. We will never know exactly what compelled Leonidas to stay. Regardless of the intent, however, the last stand at Thermopylae would become one of the most effective feats of propaganda in history. Becoming legend. Despite the Greeks failing all their objectives, the final decision to go down fighting allowed the Battle of Thermopylae to take on an enormous symbolic significance. This was a fact seized upon by the Spartans. Because it was their king who ultimately gave the order to stand, they could claim credit for the sacrifice, despite the Spartiates representing only a fifth of those who stayed behind. Thanks to carefully organized commemorations of the battle at home and at Thermopylae, the Spartans were able to take complete control of the ensuing narrative. It is telling that Herodotus, who writes of the fight almost 2 generations later, boasts that he had memorized the names of the 300 Spartans rather than any of the other participants. This bias in our primary source colorizes his retelling of the battle by projecting backwards from a point in time when the Spartan myth had already begun to take root. It is an incredible testament to the enduring nature of this story that it takes precedent in history over the far more significant encounters at Salamis and Plataea.
What happens is the Greek army is going to flee from Thermopylae, which is right here, and they're going to retreat back down into here, all right? And there's this place called Salamis right here, and Athens is being right here. So Salamis and Athens. So what happens, I think, is very interesting. The Athenian navy is going to keep on retreating back down this way, and all the Greeks are basically going to gather down here at Salamis, and the Athenians are going to evacuate Athens. They're going to leave Athens and basically retreat to Salamis. So Salamis is the big final stand of all the Greeks right here. But don't think that the Athenians are like giving up. The Athenian navy that they're leading, along with all the other ships of the Greeks that they've compiled together, are all ready to fight. And there's one big weakness that the Persians have. If the Persian navy can be defeated, then the Persians won't have an easy retreat or supply chain. And that's important too, because the Persian army is getting its food and supplies from their navy. So if the Persian navy happens to ever be defeated, then the Persian army will be left without any aid and they will have to go back home. They'll have to live off the land and retreat back home. That's the way to beat them. So let's go through the notes part, okay? The Persians marched south after their victory at Thermopylae, and then they destroy the city of Athens. This was planned. The destruction of Athens was something that the Greeks gave up as a big carrot to the Persians. So the Persian army is all sitting here at Athens. There's nothing here. The Athenians have destroyed the farms. They've wiped everything out that the Persians can use. So the Persians gloriously, happily, joyously defeat Athens by just destroying an empty city. And then they're kind of stuck because there's not a lot of food, the whole thing. So they wait here a bit while they wait for their navy to deliver supplies. This is a story that gets repeated throughout history as other people have the same problem when their navy is relied upon for the entire resupply of their army. So the Athenians had already moved to Salamis, as I was saying. Okay, giving you the animations on the screen. And then we have 800 Persian ships attacking the Athenian navy near this area right here. So there's this big fight between 800 Persian ships and the Athenian navy right here. Athens is destroyed. The Athenian navy is now up for the game. Salamis is where the rest of the Greek army is sitting. What's going to happen? Okay. The problem is that the Persian ships were bigger and deeper than the Athenian ships were. The Athenian ships were developed to sail this region, and the Athenians knew where all the reefs and all the rocks were, the ones above water and below the water, and the Athenian ships can simply outmaneuver the Persian ships, and that's what happened. The smaller Greek ships that could actually sail around in this little spit of territory is going to outmaneuver the Persian ships, okay, and the Athenians are going to win the naval battle. And that means the Persian army is sitting right here, completely exposed. It might be a big army, but there's a lot of Greeks, and they're kind of angry. And the Persians have no supply chain at all because their navy is defeated by the Athenians. So what happens next? All right, a little image right there for you. So the Athenians are going to basically join in with the rest of the Greeks as they chase Xerxes out of Athens, and basically the Greeks will have to retreat, or sorry, the Persians will have to retreat all the way back by land to get back to Persia. And that's the last time the Persians really tried to invade Greece. Okay, it's the last time that happens in this way. Okay, so what happens as a result of the Persian Wars? Well, there's two powers, okay? Athens will organize this thing called the Delian League, which is an alliance of all these coastal Greek city-states. It's mostly all the Greeks, we'll talk more about this later, that are in this region right here. The Athenians now have the most powerful navy in the entire region, especially since the Persian navy is defeated. And the Athenians get to say, we gave up our city and we gave up our navy to fight this war, and we won it. And therefore, because we were the big deciding factor of this war, we are going to form a league and we will protect everybody with our big navy. So the Athenians are a superpower now that are going to control this entire Aegean Sea. And they're going to force everybody to join them because the Athenians have this big, powerful navy. So the Athenians are going to build an empire. They get kind of big for their britches after the Persian Wars. They build this empire. And it's interesting because at the same time, the Spartans basically retreat back into their home territory down here. And the Spartans start to tell a story about their Spartans that died at Thermopylae. The end result is, guys, is that the Spartans are going to be telling this story of propaganda about how they saved Greece. And meanwhile, the Athenians, of course, are spinning their story about how they saved Greece. Well, the only guys that really stick it out to create an empire based on their fame are the Athenians. Because, guys, the Spartans had to go back home, and you might remember why. They had to go back home and spin their stories of glory and greatness and memorialize King Leonidas, who, along with a lot of other Greeks, died up here at Thermopylae early in this part of the war. But the Spartans had to go home because they were worried about a rebellion of the Helots. Remember the slaves that lived down here. So the Spartans can't really do anything with their fame except say how famous they are. Meanwhile, the Athenians have no problem at all. They're going to use the money that they take in tribute from all these different Greek city-states here when they build their empire to rebuild a bigger Athens. And we're going to get into how people are going to start to get really annoyed with the Athenians as the Athenians grow this big, giant state based on the taxes that they charge all these other people for protection against any other incursions of the Persians. So there's going to be this big treasury in Athens, and basically everybody that lives here, right here, are going to have to pay a bunch of money to Athens every year, and they're going to have to donate manpower and ships as well to the Athenian Navy. Basically, the city of Athens is going to grow so powerful on all this money that they collect from all these other people in the region to protect them from any other invasion, that the Athenians build such a big and powerful state, which I liken to the Death Star here, because that's kind of what this is, that other Greeks start to fear that they could never, if there was ever another war, it would probably be started by Athens, and there's no way to basically fight the Athenians because they've gotten too powerful. Huge navy, giant city, giant walls around the city. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be the results of the Persian War. Delian League, massive Athenian superpower controlling the Aegean Sea, and a huge fortified Athens that will be built after the war that's going to lead to a civil war. And that civil war will be called the Peloponnesian War. And that is next week's story. Okay? That's a symbol of the Athenian Empire. That is it. We'll get to the Peloponnesian War next week. I'm looking forward to it. See you then.